August 1st, 1943, Benghazi, Libya. Inside a sweltering briefing tent, hundreds of American airmen studied aerial reconnaissance photographs that would alter their lives forever. The target, Ploesti, Romania, a name most could barely pronounce, was shown in grainy detail. 9 vast refinery complexes spread across the Wakian Plain, 35 miles north of Bucharest. These installations were not mere factories. They were the jugular vein of Nazi Germany. The figures were stark. These refineries produced roughly 60% of Germany's crude oil supply, about 10 million tons a year. Every gallon refined there, powered Wehrmacht trucks crawling across the Eastern Front, kept U-boat hunters at sea and Luftwaffe fighters in the air. American planners ran the math until it hardened into cold certainty. If Ploesti went dark, Germany's war machine would be crippled within months. Panzer divisions would be reduced to immobile hulks. The Luftwaffe would be grounded. The entire German war effort depended on the oil flowing from those 9 refineries. Operation Tidal Wave was born of that calculus, an audacious bombing plan unlike anything attempted. Instead of the high-altitude raids that had become the norm, this mission would send B-24 Liberators screaming in at treetop level, some aircraft skimming as low as 50 feet. The logic was ruthless and terrifying. At extreme low altitude, bombers could slip beneath German radar, preserve surprise, and place delayed fuse bombs with near-surgical accuracy onto cracking towers and storage tanks. The delayed fuses gave crews roughly 45 seconds to clear the target area before their own ordnance detonated. In theory, the plan was brilliant. In practice, it demanded crews fly massive 4-engine bombers through a ferocious gauntlet of flak batteries, machine gun nests and barrage balloons at better than 200 MEPUs with no margin for error. Mission planners knew the price could be catastrophic. Pre-mission estimates predicted losses up to 50%. Half the attacking force might not return. Yet the strategic calculus remained brutal and simple. If PLY burned, the Third Reich's capacity for mechanized warfare would collapse. Germany had tried synthetic fuel production, but those plants could not match Ploesti's output. Romania's geological fortune, vast petroleum deposits beneath the Carpathian foothills, had become Hitler's strategic dependency. The tent fell quiet when intelligence officers revealed the final detail. 5 bombardment groups would take part, 178 B-24 Liberators, each loaded with 1,000-pound bombs. The aircraft would fly a 2,400-mile round trip, much of it over enemy territory, and for the final leg, there would be no fighter escort. Navigation would depend on dead reckoning and visual landmarks. Radio silence would be absolute. Each crew would memorize a single refinery target, an approach path, and an escape route. There would be no second chances and no aborts once committed. The 9th Air Force was wagering everything on surprise, speed, and the courage of men who comprehended they were flying into history. Among the airmen absorbing the briefing sat a young pilot from Texas, his gaze fixed on the photographs. He did not yet know his name would become permanently linked with Ploesti. The choices he would make over Romania, the split-second decisions between mission completion and self-preservation, would define him. The briefing ended with weather reports and final synchronization notes, but the unspoken truth lingered in the North African heat. Many in that tent were seeing their last sunrise. Second Lieutenant Lloyd Herbert Hughes had turned 24 just 3 weeks earlier. Born in Alexandria, Louisiana, and raised in San Antonio, Texas, he fit the archetype of the young American, athletic, methodical, quietly confident. Before the war, Hughes had studied pre-med at the University of Texas, planning a life in medicine. Pearl Harbor changed that. Like thousands of his generation, he enlisted, trading textbooks for flight manuals. By 1943, he had earned his silver wings and been posted to the 564th Bombardment Squadron, 389th Bombardment Group, a unit destined to fly the longest and lowest bombing mission in aviation history. Hughes commanded a 10-man crew aboard a B-24 Liberator, an aircraft pilots regarded with mixed feelings. The B-24 was a workhorse rather than a thoroughbred. It could carry more bombs farther than the famed B-17 Flying Fortress, but it was harder to handle, less forgiving, and had earned the grim nickname the Flying Coffin for its tendency to burst into flames when struck in the fuel tanks. Its high-mounted Davis wing gave it exceptional range, vital for reaching Ploesti, but also made it unstable at low altitude. Flying a B-24 at 50 feet required constant attention, split-second corrections, and nerves of steel. One moment of distraction could send a bomber plowing into the earth at 200 miles per hour. Hughes's crew had trained together for months at Biggs Field near El Paso, then at advanced bases in Florida before shipping overseas. They had practiced low-altitude formation, flying over the Gulf of Mexico, screaming so low the spray hit their windshields. They had rehearsed timed bomb runs in the Arizona desert, perfecting coordination between pilot, bombardier, and navigator, coordination that could mean the difference between striking a refinery tower and missing by 100 yards. Each man knew his role intimately. Technical Sergeant Robert Calloway manned the top turret, scanning for fighters. Staff Sergeant Harold Angus crouched in the nose turret, ready to return ground fire. In the waist, two gunners would engage ground and aerial threats of opportunity while battling the brutal slipstream, tearing through open gun ports. The 389th Bombardment Group received its assignment during the final mission briefings, the credital Romanesque Refinery within the Ploesti complex, smaller than others, yet strategically essential. Intelligence photos revealed towering, cracking columns rising 150 feet, vast storage tanks holding millions of gallons of fuel, and an intricate web of pipelines connecting the facilities. The 389th would approach from the southwest, using railroad tracks as visual markers, then follow a precise heading directly over the refinery's most vital infrastructure. Delayed action fuses would be set for 45 seconds, long enough to escape the blast zone, too short for enemy crews to disarm the bombs. That night, Hughes wrote home to his wife Barbara, whom he'd married just before leaving, and to his parents in San Antonio. He didn't mention Romania or Ploesti. Censorship forbade it. His tone carried the quiet resolve of a man aware he might never return. Around him, other crews passed time with cards, checked their gear again and again, or sat silently, each man confronting his fears in his own way. The chaplain offered services for those who wished to pray, while maintenance crews toiled through the night, inspecting engines, hydraulics, and bomb racks. There would be no excuses over Ploesti, no mechanical failures to blame. Whatever happened would rest on human endurance and courage under fire. Dawn broke on August 1st beneath cloudless skies, perfect weather for dying. Hughes and his men gathered for final checks: parachutes, Mae West vests, survival kits, silk escape maps, and pistols. Every man knew parachutes were useless at 50 feet. If they were hit, they'd ride the plane down. Hughes completed his inspection with calm precision, tracing control surfaces, testing response, and verifying fuel. His Liberator was heavy, fully loaded with fuel and bombs, sluggish on takeoff and dangerous if damaged. At 0700 hours, the quiet of Benghazi shattered as 178 B-24s roared to life. 712 Pratt & Whitney engines thundered, shaking the desert air. The armada rose in waves from multiple airfields, climbing slowly into formation. Hughes guided his bomber into position, feeling every ounce of weight through the controls. The 389th, led by Colonel Jack Wood, would strike second. Ahead, the 376th and 93rd aimed for the Romano-Americana and Columbia-Aquila refineries. Behind them came the 98th and 44th, bound for the remaining targets. For miles, the sky filled with silver wings, a living symbol of American industrial might and the courage of 1,651 men. They flew northeast over the Mediterranean at 10,000 feet to save fuel. The endless sea gave way to the jagged coasts of Greece, then the mountain ridges of Albania and Yugoslavia. Crews endured the monotony and tension of the long haul, scanning instruments and horizons, rotating watch shifts to fight fatigue. Navigation relied on pilotage and dead reckoning, matching rivers, roads, and peaks to maps, counting minutes and bearings with relentless precision. Radio silence was total. One stray transmission could alert German defenses across the Balkans. Then over the Danube, everything began to unravel. The lead navigator of the 376th, responsible for guiding the entire force, made a fateful mistake at a checkpoint near Ploesti. Instead of turning left toward Ploesti on the northern route, he veered right, leading his formation south. By the time anyone realized, they were 40 miles off course. The synchronized plan, 5 groups striking 9 refineries in unison, was shattered. Some commanders corrected their course. Others followed the mistaken lead, assuming the change was intentional. The formation fractured in the skies. Hughes and the 389th held steady on their assigned heading, trusting their maps and compasses. But the damage was done. German radar picked up the massive formation crossing the Danube, and air raid sirens wailed across Ploesti at 13:45, 45 minutes before the first bombs should have fallen. The element of surprise, the foundation of the entire mission, was gone. Romanian and German defenders scrambled. Flak batteries loaded their 88mm guns with contact-fused shells. Machine gunners readied their belts. Fighter squadrons launched Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Romanian-flown IAR-80s into the burning afternoon sky. The Ploesti refineries were waiting. Defenders had faced air raids before, but always from high altitudes, where flak arcs and fighter intercepts followed predictable geometry. Low-altitude assaults demanded new tactics, direct fire, visual tracking, and lightning-fast reactions at point-blank range. As the 389th approached from the south, Hughes saw smoke pillars twisting skyward, thick black columns marking where the lead groups had already struck. The original plan called for staggered approaches from multiple directions to avoid overlap, but navigational errors had compressed the entire schedule. Instead of 5 groups hitting in sequence, bombers were now converging on Ploesti from all directions, creating chaos in the target zone and multiplying the risk of mid-air collisions. Hughes checked his gauges, fuel usage on target. All 4 engines steady, bomb bay doors tested and ready. In the nose, First Lieutenant John McCormack lay prone over the Norden site, waiting for the crosshairs to settle. At 14:10 hours, Hughes dropped to 300 feet, the prescribed attack altitude. The Liberator shuddered as it entered ground effect, that invisible cushion of air that could lift or kill with equal ease. The Romanian countryside whipped by beneath them, fields, roads, villages, faces turning skyward in astonishment as bombers thundered past at rooftop height. Ahead, the credital Romanesque refinery materialized through haze, cracking towers like skeletal spires, storage tanks glinting in the sun, pipelines crisscrossing like arteries. Then came the muzzle flashes, German gunners unleashing every weapon they had. Hughes rammed the throttles forward. The air around them erupted. Flak batteries, 88mm guns depressed to near horizontal, formed interlocking walls of fire. 37mm and 20mm cannons hurled explosive shells at 120 rounds a minute. Machine gun nests on towers, rooftops, and tank catwalks filled the sky with tracer webs. Even the refinery itself bristled with guns mounted atop towers for clear firing arcs. What the 389th entered wasn't just anti-aircraft fire. It was an engineered kill zone. The first hits came as metallic hammer blows reverberating through the fuselage. 20mm shells tore through the Liberator's thin aluminum skin. The B-24 carried no real armor. Weight meant range, and range meant life. But within seconds, that trade-off proved fatal. A burst of 37mm shells raked the belly, and Hughes saw fuel pressure drop on engine number 3. Hydraulic fluid sprayed into the slipstream. In the waist, Sergeant Angus ducked as molten shards sliced through the fuselage. Then came the incendiaries, armor-piercing, high-explosive and phosphorus rounds mixed to ignite aviation fuel. One struck the left wing. The number 2 tank's gauge plummeted as a shimmering ribbon of fuel streamed aft. Over the intercom came shouts, "Fire in the bomb bay! Fuel leak port wing!" The flames started small but had endless fuel. At 100 octane, aviation gas is both lifeblood and death trap, burning hotter and faster than anything else aboard. Fire climbed from a flicker to a roaring sheet that engulfed the bomb bay and spread aft. The Liberator's magnesium fittings, fabric control surfaces, and stressed aluminum skin all became accelerants. Internal heat soared past 500 degrees. Paint blistered from the bulkheads. Hughes fought the yoke as the aircraft's behavior changed. The rudder felt soft, control cables stretching and melting. Ailerons still answered, but sluggishly. The fire was eating structure, burning hydraulics, warping spars. Most dangerously, it crept toward the bomb racks where 10 1,000-pound delayed fuse bombs hung armed and live. Their fuses set to detonate 45 seconds after release. If the flames reached the fuse mechanisms or heated the explosive compounds past their critical temperature, the aircraft would vanish in a single cataclysmic blast. The creditul Romanesque refinery now filled Hughes's windscreen. He had covered barely half the distance from first engagement to bomb release, though each second stretched into eternity. Another burst of flak shattered the co-pilot's window, blasting shards and wind into the cockpit. A near miss rocked engine number 4, RPMs spiking, fragments peppering the wing. Beneath them, fire streamed 15 feet aft from the bomb bay, a blowtorch riding the slipstream. Crews on nearby radios could see Hughes's Liberator trailing flame and smoke, clearly doomed, yet still holding formation and altitude toward target. Everyone aboard knew the truth. They were flying a burning bomber, loaded with 10,000 pounds of explosives through the deadliest airspace in Europe. The rational choice, the one survival itself demanded, was to salvo the bombs immediately, break away, climb, and pray for time to bail out or crash land before the fire reached the bay. Regulations allowed such an abort without question. No one would have called it cowardice. Yet that choice meant failure. Their bombs wasted over farmland, the refinery untouched, Germany's war machine still fueled. That decision point lasted mere seconds, though Hughes later seemed to have lived a lifetime inside them. At 300 feet and 210 miles per hour, 3 seconds equaled nearly 1,000 feet, an eternity compressed into motion. He knew the fire was advancing fast, eating the structure, cutting survival odds with every breath. The bomb bay was a live countdown. 1 more minute of heat could ignite the load. His navigator shouted that the waist section had casualties. His engineer yelled about dropping fuel pressure. Every calculation screamed abort. But something in Hughes overrode the logic. A deeper conviction formed in the Benghazi briefings. He remembered the strategy that justified Operation Tidal Wave, the acceptance of immense loss for decisive gain. If Ploesti burned, the Eastern Front would falter. Luftwaffe squadrons would wither for lack of fuel. The war could end months sooner. It wasn't about one crew. It was about whether 1,751 airmen could cripple the Reich's oil heartland enough to justify their sacrifice. Hughes also knew how the 45-second fuses made every bomb more than an explosive. They were instruments of sustained destruction. Detonation delays allowed bombers to escape and denied defenders time to fight the fires. A delayed blast, buried in vital machinery, ensured chaos, casualties, and uncontrollable blazes. The geometry of the run reinforced his resolve. The refinery stretched roughly 800 yards in length. The 389th's plan required a straight approach along its long axis, dropping bombs in a walking pattern that would sweep from cracking towers through storage tanks and manifolds. Abort now, and the bombardier couldn't achieve that precision. The bombs might scatter, damaging little. Hughes's burning Liberator had to stay level long enough to guarantee the pattern's accuracy. Inside, the crew sensed his decision. Some accounts recall co-pilot Second Lieutenant Harold Wheatley pleading to abort, insisting they'd done enough. Others remained silent, respecting their commander's choice, even as the cockpit filled with smoke and heat. In the top turret, Sergeant Calloway kept his twin 50-caliber guns hammering, suppressing flak positions despite hopeless odds. That was the unspoken code of bomber crews. Perform your duty until ordered otherwise, or until you couldn't. Hughes's training at Biggs Field now guided him more than thought. His hands made constant, precise corrections on the yoke, instinctively holding the aircraft steady through turbulence, shrapnel, and flame. Keeping the aircraft steady despite uneven thrust from crippled engines and aerodynamic drag from shredded metal. His boots worked the rudder pedals rhythmically, offsetting the Liberator's instinct to yaw toward the burning left wing. His eyes swept from gauges to horizon, to target in a trained loop, reading information faster than thought. That automatic mastery bought him the mental space to face the decision that would define his existence. The credital Romanesque refinery loomed ahead, less than 30 seconds away. Firelight from the fuselage danced across the cockpit glass, turning every surface a deep orange and making the instruments blur. The heat in the compartment exceeded 150 degrees. Metal scalded to the touch. Smoke filled every corner, forcing the crew to breathe through rags soaked in water, coffee, or anything that could dull the sting. The aircraft was breaking apart, skin, cables, and structure surrendering to fire and steel. Hughes had reached his moment. They would finish the bombing run. He shoved the throttles forward, ignoring the tortured roar of dying engines. Engine number 3 coughed and ran rough, its cylinder temperature deep in the red. Oil streamed from number 2, pressure dropping fast, but the remaining power held 210 mph, the critical release speed. In the nose, Lieutenant McCormick pressed his face to the blistering metal eyepiece of the Norden sight, fighting smoke and heat to refine his aim. The Norden, a clockwork computer of gears and gyros, required flawless inputs. At 300 feet, any error meant a complete miss. Their final approach took them directly through the heart of the refinery's defenses. German gunners, spotting the flaming bomber, converged their fire. Tracer rounds laced the sky in white and red, forming a glowing lattice that seemed solid. For every tracer streak, 4 unseen rounds cut through the air, a storm of lead and shrapnel. The sound inside the aircraft became unearthly, a steady metallic hammering shattered by booming impacts from flak bursts. In the waist, Staff Sergeant Henry Leckworth took shrapnel hits but stayed at his station, his 50-caliber gun chattering at muzzle flash after muzzle flash. "Bomb bay doors open!" McCormick's voice rasped over the intercom. Hughes felt the plane shudder as hydraulic rams forced the heavy doors into the gale. The moment they dropped, oxygen surged into the blaze. Fire that had been smoldering erupted, an instant furnace. The bomb bay turned white-hot, its temperature surpassing 800 degrees. Paint ignited. Rubber seals liquefied. Bomb shackles glowed cherry red. Aluminum beams, the very spine of the fuselage, softened as they neared their 1,000-degree failure point. The refinery's main towers passed beneath. McCormick aligned the crosshairs, adjusted for drift, and squeezed the release. "Bombs away!" The Liberator jolted upward as 5 tons of explosives dropped free, the airframe suddenly lightened by the weight of a car. The bombs fell in a perfect train across the complex, each 1,000-pound cylinder packed with 650 pounds of tritonal, a TNT aluminum mix that blasted and burned with terrifying force. The 45-second fuses began ticking the moment they left the bay. Hughes had less than a minute to escape before his own bombs erupted beneath him. Then the doors jammed. Hydraulic pressure had bled out through ruptured lines, leaving the bomb bay gaping open. Drag increased violently, feeding even more oxygen to the flames. Airspeed bled away, 205 mph per 200, 195. The Liberator, already too low, teetered on the edge of stall. Hughes eased the yoke forward, trading altitude for precious speed. The altimeter unwound, 250 feet, 200, 175. On the roads below, Romanian civilians stared in shock as the blazing bomber roared past at treetop height. trailing fire for 30 feet. The bombing run wasn't complete until they cleared the far perimeter, and defenders kept firing all the way through the escape. A cluster of 88mm shells burst off the right wing, shredding tanks and igniting fresh fires. The inboard engine was struck squarely, control cables severed, fuel lines torn. It froze in an instant, the propeller locking mid-spin. The aircraft yawed hard to starboard. Hughes slammed his left foot on the rudder pedal, muscles straining to hold course. The force required to keep the bomber level was almost superhuman. Was tremendous. Controlling a crippled four-engine bomber at treetop height demanded brute strength that set every muscle aflame, sweat pouring despite the heat and smoke, dehydration inevitable. Then behind them, the delayed fuse bombs began to detonate. The first struck a pumping station, its blast shearing high-pressure lines and hurling a geyser of burning fuel 100 feet skyward. The next hit a storage tank, holding 50,000 gallons of aviation gasoline. It didn't just explode, it became a fuel-air bomb, vaporized fuel mixing with oxygen before ignition. The blast shattered windows 3 miles away and sent a mushroom cloud rising over Bucharest. One by one, the rest of the bombs walked across the refinery's core, each detonation folding steel towers worth millions of Reichsmarks into molten wreckage. Within 90 seconds, the Creditul Romanesque refinery had become an inferno that would burn for 3 days. Hughes cleared the perimeter with his aircraft coming apart around him. The fire had consumed the bomb bay and was spreading both forward toward the cockpit and aft toward the tail. Control cables frayed and snapped as their casings melted. The aluminum skin burned through in spots, flames venting like torches. On the ground, witnesses saw a B-24 transformed into a flying bonfire, streaming fire for a quarter mile. That it still flew defied physics. Only Hughes's ceaseless control kept it from rolling inverted or plunging into the fields below. Inside, the crew's struggle was hopeless. Waste gunners fought the flames with handheld extinguishers, futile gestures against an inferno fed by hundreds of gallons of high-octane gas. The radio operator had fled his post, the deck plates beneath him glowing red-hot. The navigator tried to chart a course to neutral Turkey, 400 miles southeast, though everyone knew they didn't have 400 miles left, barely 40. The plane's structure was failing in real time, fire, stress, and battle damage combining to tear it apart. Hughes tried to climb, hoping to buy his men a chance to bail out. He pulled back on the yoke. The response was sluggish, the climb barely 50 feet per minute instead of 500. At 600 feet, he gave the order, calm and steady, prepare to bail out. In the rear, crewmen moved toward hatches, but bailing from a flaming B-24 at such low altitude was almost impossible. Jumping required straight, level flight. This bomber was neither. At 14-18 hours, 8 minutes after the first flak hit, the structural failure came. A main fuselage frame in the bomb bay section, weakened by heat and stress, collapsed. The circular frames that carried loads from wing to tail began to buckle in sequence. The fuselage bent and split. The tail drooped, cables and hydraulics parted, and the aircraft ceased to fly. Hughes still fought the yoke, trying to guide the wreck into a field rather than a village. Ahead stretched open farmland, harvested wheat stubble flat enough to try. He throttled back the surviving engines, cutting fuel to lessen the fire on impact. The Liberator dropped fast, its broken spine twisting as it fell. At roughly 300 feet and 140 mid-pitch, it was falling more than flying. The crash came 7 miles north of Ploesti, near the village of Târgu-Șoruvechi. The bomber struck the ground hard, plowing 200 feet before coming to rest. The deceleration, dozens of G-forces sustained for seconds, was unsurvivable. Remaining fuel ignited instantly, engulfing the wreck in a fireball that consumed the forward fuselage. Hughes, still at the controls, trying to wrestle the impossible, died instantly. Co-pilot seen. Wheatley perished beside him in the shattered forward section. Bombardier McCormick, Navigator Second Lieutenant Robert Benny, and Engineer Technical Sergeant Joseph Militello also died instantly. In the tail section, sheared away during descent, a few crewmen survived the impact. The rear fuselage struck separately, its impact less violent and farther from the main fuel fire, allowing a handful of men a chance to live. Tail gunner Staff Sergeant Arthur Melrose crawled from the wreck, grievously injured but alive. Radio operator Technical Sergeant Robert Barker emerged with burns and broken bones. Waist gunner Leckworth, already hit by shrapnel earlier in the run, survived with additional wounds. These survivors, along with 2 others, were soon captured and became prisoners of war. They would endure 2 years in Romanian and German camps before being liberated in 1945. Operation Tidal Wave's toll stunned even its planners. Of the 178 B-24 Liberators that left Benghazi on August 1, 1943, only 124 returned. 54 aircraft were lost, shot down over Ploesti, crashed in forced landings, or ditched in the Mediterranean when fuel ran out. The human cost was even more devastating. 660 American airmen were casualties. 310 were killed, their bodies scattered across Romania or lost at sea. 108 were captured and imprisoned. 42 wounded men made it home, many never to fly again. Yet the crucial question wasn't the price, it was whether that price had meaning. Aerial reconnaissance in the following days gave the answer. The bombing had ravaged Ploesti's refinery network. Hughes's target, the creditor Romanesque refinery, suffered roughly 60% destruction of capacity. Its tanks obliterated, towers toppled, pipelines torn, offices incinerated. The Romano-Americana refinery, hit by the 93rd Bomb Group, took similar punishment. Altogether, the 9 refinery complex at Ploesti lost about 40% of its output. Germany's petroleum supply dropped by nearly 240,000 tons per month. The effects were immediate. Luftwaffe squadrons across Europe received smaller fuel rations through autumn 1943, forcing reduced sortie rates. Panzer divisions on the Eastern Front operated under strict fuel limits, slowing their counter-offensives. German planners diverted scarce steel and manpower to synthetic fuel programs and refinery repairs. Romania demanded more protection, pulling flak guns and fighters from other fronts. The shock rippled through the Nazi war economy, but the respite was temporary. German engineers and Romanian laborers began rebuilding within days. Berlin prioritized Ploesti's recovery, diverting vital steel, pipes and electrical systems from other industries. Their efficiency was remarkable. By November 1943, production had rebounded to 80% of pre-raid levels. By March 1944, 90%. Meanwhile, defenses were massively reinforced. New flak batteries, fighter reinforcements, and smoke screens to conceal the refineries from future attacks. This rapid recovery forced Allied strategists to face an uncomfortable truth. One spectacular mission, no matter how brave, could not cripple such a critical target for long. 54 lost bombers and 660 casualties had brought only months of disruption. The lesson was clear. Sustained, repeated strikes were essential. When U.S. forces returned to Ploesti in 1944, they came again and again, flying 24 raids between April and August that finally annihilated the refineries beyond repair. The tactical lessons from Operation Tidal Wave reshaped American bombing doctrine. The low-level approach, though precise, had proven suicidal against concentrated defenses. Post-mission analysis concluded that any heavily defended target demanded higher altitude attacks, above 10,000 feet, where survival odds were greater even at the cost of accuracy. Henceforth, strategic planners accepted that missed bombs were better than lost crews. The raid of August 1, 1943, became the final time American heavy bombers ever attempted a massive low-altitude assault. Bombers would never again deliberately assault such a heavily defended target at low altitude during the European War. The mission's place in history was secured not merely by its tactical novelty or strategic consequences, but by the unparalleled valor displayed by those who flew it. The courage concentrated over Ploesti was unprecedented. The U.S. Army Air Forces ultimately awarded 5 Medals of Honor for actions during Operation Tidal Wave, more than for any other single mission in the European theater. Each decoration honored men who embodied the mission's defining spirit, advancing toward the objective despite catastrophic damage, prioritizing mission success over survival, and accepting certain death for a strategic purpose. Second Lieutenant Lloyd Herbert Hughes received the Medal of Honor, posthumously on August 1, 1944, exactly 1 year after his death above Romania. His citation, signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, captured his decision in stark, formal prose, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty in action with the enemy on 1st August 1943. On this date, Lieutenant Hughes served as pilot of a heavy bombardment aircraft, participating in a dangerous low-level attack against enemy oil refineries at Ploesti, Romania. Flying in the last section of the formation, his plane was repeatedly struck by heavy anti-aircraft fire and burst into flames. Fully aware that his aircraft was a flying bomb and that his life expectancy was measured in seconds, he elected to continue his attack rather than endanger his formation's bombing run. With outstanding skill and courage, he flew the flaming plane over the target and released his bombs with devastating accuracy. Immediately after release, the aircraft disintegrated. By his supreme heroism and disregard for his own life, Lieutenant Hughes made possible the success of his formation's mission. 4 others earned the same distinction that day. Colonel John Riley Kane, commanding the 98th Bombardment Group, pressed home his attack even as his lead ship was savaged by flak and his formation thrown into confusion by smoke and fire. Second Lieutenant Lloyd D. Hughes, no relation, was cited for maintaining formation despite fatal damage. Major John L. Gerstad, who had already completed his combat tour but volunteered for the Ploesti mission, knowing the odds, died leading his squadron through the target. Colonel Leon W. Johnson, heading the 44th Bombardment Group, drove through intense fire to destroy his assigned refinery and somehow brought his shattered bomber home. 5 Medals of Honor in a single day of combat was unprecedented and would remain so throughout World War II. These awards recognized that Ploesti represented something beyond courage as usually defined, a mission where traditional measures of bravery and duty no longer sufficed. The citations echoed a common refrain: pilots who knew they were dying yet pressed on, commanders who led from the front when safety lay behind, crews who held discipline amid fire, smoke, and chaos. These were not mere flashes of heroism lasting seconds. They were prolonged acts of will, reaffirmed every moment until death left no choice. Hughes's belongings were later returned to his widow, Barbara, in San Antonio. Among them were the letters he had written the night before the mission, quiet, measured words, revealing a man who knew the risks and accepted them as the necessary price of purpose. Barbara eventually remarried, but kept her husband's Medal of Honor displayed prominently, ensuring her children understood the meaning of his sacrifice. The medal itself, its light blue ribbon supporting a bronze star suspended from an eagle, moved from family homes to museums, where it continues to teach new generations about the human cost of strategic warfare. The legacy of Ploesti extended far beyond casualty lists and commendations. It shaped the foundations of modern air power doctrine. Military academies still study August 1, 1943 as a case study in operational planning, coordination, and the limits of human endurance under concentrated fire. The raid proved that precision bombing could achieve decisive results, but only when intelligence, timing, and discipline converged flawlessly. It also demonstrated that low-level bombing, though theoretically precise, was suicidally vulnerable against entrenched defenses. Most enduringly, it forced military strategists to define acceptable loss. Thresholds in pursuit of national objectives, a calculus that continues to influence planning in the 21st century. Hughes's name lives on in numerous memorials. Biggs Army Airfield near El Paso, where he trained, erected a plaque listing those who passed through its gates and never returned. The 389th Bombardment Group's records, preserved in museums and veteran archives, enshrine his final flight as the embodiment of their motto, anything, anytime, anywhere. At the U.S. Air Force Academy, Operation Tidal Wave remains part of ethics and leadership curricula. Hughes's decision, taught as the quintessential example of duty over self-preservation. Yet one question continues to shadow. Ploesti, was the sacrifice justified? Did 660 American lives secure results that warranted the price? The answer depends on perspective. In the short term, the raid crippled production and forced Germany to divert resources, achieving immediate strategic disruption. In the medium term, rapid reconstruction erased much of that gain, suggesting failure. But in the long view, when seen as the prelude to the sustained 1944 bombing campaign that finally annihilated the Nazi fuel network, the mission stands as the vital first strike in those final moments over the Creditul Românesc refinery. As his burning bomber disintegrated around him, Hughes embodied the essence of strategic warfare. Individual lives weighed against collective victory. He and his peers had understood that bargain in the abstract during briefings in Benghazi. Over Romania, they honored it in action. Hughes's decision was not madness or martyrdom. It was a deliberate acceptance that some objectives demand the ultimate price. That conscious choice, that willingness to continue when every instinct urged escape, defined the difference between courage and immortal valor. At 24 years old, in a Romanian wheat field, Lloyd Herbert Hughes fulfilled the mission his nation had asked of him. He delivered his bombs on target, no matter the cost, and in doing so became eternal.